When the first German prisoners of war arrived on American shores in 1943, they came with a very specific understanding of what awaited them. Nazi propaganda had spent years describing the United States as a nation in collapse, a mongrel country weakened by racial mixing, crippled by the Great Depression, and utterly incapable of matching German industrial and military might. The Führer himself had dismissed America as half Judaized, half negrified, with no capacity for serious warfare. So when Hauptmann Werner Kritzinger stepped off the transport ship in Norfolk, Virginia, he expected to see a country struggling under the weight of war mobilization. What he saw instead left him speechless. The docks were enormous, larger than anything he'd seen in Hamburg or Bremen. Cranes moved with mechanical precision, unloading cargo at a pace that seemed impossible. Trucks, endless lines of brand new trucks, waited in perfect formation. And the soldiers guarding them looked well-fed, well-equipped, and utterly unconcerned. Where are the shortages? Kritzinger wrote in a diary he kept secretly. Where is the desperation we were promised? As the prisoners were loaded onto trains heading inland, they pressed their faces against the windows. What they saw on that journey would fundamentally shatter everything they believed about America, and about Germany's chances of winning the war. The train carrying German POWs from Norfolk to their internment camp in Oklahoma rolled through the American heartland for 3 days. Every hour brought new shocks. Through Pennsylvania, they saw steel mills that stretched for miles, furnaces burning day and night, smokestacks pumping constant streams into the sky. The Krupp works in Essen, Germany's pride, would fit into just one section of what they witnessed. Through Ohio, factories producing tanks, trucks, and aircraft parts ran 24-hour shifts. The prisoners could see workers changing shifts, thousands of them, including women, flooding out of factory gates only to be replaced by thousands more. Oberstfreiter Klaus Hartmann counted the factories they passed in a single day. He stopped at 63. Impossible, he muttered. The numbers don't work. But they did work. America's industrial mobilization was producing staggering quantities, one ship every day, one aircraft every 5 minutes, tanks and trucks rolling off assembly lines faster than Germany could destroy them. Through the Midwest, agricultural machinery covered fields larger than many German towns. Grain silos rose like cathedrals. The abundance was incomprehensible to men who'd left a Germany already struggling with food rationing. One prisoner, Gefreiter Otto Brenner, watched mile after mile of farmland pass and realized something that chilled him: we cannot win this war. It's not possible. They have too much of everything. The POW camps in America were nothing like the prisoners expected. The Geneva Convention required adequate food and shelter, but what the Germans received went far beyond adequate. It exceeded what many had eaten even before the war. Breakfast at Camp Como, Texas, included eggs, bacon, bread with butter, coffee, and orange juice. Real coffee. Real butter. Quantities that seemed wasteful. Lunch brought meat, potatoes, vegetables, and dessert. Dinner was equally substantial. The German prisoners were eating approximately 4,000 calories per day, more than German soldiers on the front lines, more than civilians back home who were surviving on increasingly meager rations. Unteroffizier Heinrich Bohm wrote to his wife, letters that were censored but allowed: "The Americans feed us better than our own army fed us. I have gained 15 pounds in 6 weeks. I am ashamed to tell you this, knowing what you must be enduring." The psychological impact was profound. These men had been told America was weak, impoverished, barely able to feed itself. Instead, they were eating better as prisoners than as soldiers. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. One senior German officer, Oberst Friedrich von Hoslen, observed something crucial during meals: the guards eat the same food we do. This is not special prisoner rations. This is what ordinary Americans eat. We have been lied to about everything. Under the Geneva Convention, POWs could be required to work, but not in war production. So the U.S. put German prisoners to work in agriculture, lumber camps, and other non-military industries. This decision gave the Germans an intimate view of American industrial capacity. At agricultural camps in California, Nebraska, and Texas, prisoners harvested crops using machinery that dwarfed anything they'd seen. One tractor could do the work of 50 men. Combines harvested wheat at speeds that seemed physically impossible. Gefreiter Martin Sievers worked a potato harvest in Idaho. In one day, we harvested more potatoes than my entire village in Saxony produces in a year. And this was just one farm. There are thousands of these farms. In lumber camps in Oregon and Washington, German POWs operated equipment that could fell and process trees at industrial scale. The timber wasn't even for war production, it was construction lumber, going to build civilian homes and commercial buildings while America simultaneously built the largest military force in history. The prisoners began to understand, America wasn't straining under war production. It was barely breaking a sweat. The country had so much excess capacity that it could feed, house, and employ enemy prisoners in comfort while simultaneously outproducing the entire Axis combined. Feldwebel Kurt Vogel wrote in his diary, "We are not just losing a war. We never had a chance to win it." American POW camps allowed prisoners access to newspapers and radio, heavily censored, but still providing far more information than they'd received under Nazi control. The psychological impact was devastating. German prisoners read about battles they'd been told were German victories. They learned the truth about Stalingrad, about North Africa, about the Eastern Front. The lies unraveled systematically. But more shocking than the military news was the civilian news. American newspapers were filled with advertisements for consumer goods, cars, refrigerators, washing machines, products that were still being manufactured and sold even while the country produced war materials at unprecedented scale. Lieutenant Dieter Hartmann read a Detroit newspaper from 1944, "There is an advertisement for a new automobile model. While we fight a total war, they are designing new civilian cars. And complaining that they can't buy as many as they want because only 3 million will be produced this year." The radio broadcasts were equally jarring. American families were being asked to accept rationing as a patriotic duty, but the rationing allowed more meat, sugar, and butter per week than German civilians had seen in years. Prisoners heard commercials for luxury goods, entertainment, sporting events. The disconnect was total. Germany had mobilized every aspect of society for war. America had mobilized only a fraction of its capacity, and was still overwhelming the Axis with material superiority. The propaganda had been backwards. America wasn't weak. It was terrifyingly strong. Some POW camps allowed trusted prisoners to work in nearby towns under minimal supervision. The Geneva Convention permitted this, and American authorities, facing labor shortages, welcomed it. For German prisoners, these town visits provided the most direct contact with American civilian life. And what they saw astonished them. Oberstfreiter Franz Weber worked at a cannery in Wisconsin. During lunch breaks, he could walk through the town. "The shops are full," he wrote. "Not black market shops. Not special stores for the elite. Regular shops that anyone can enter. There is meat. There is clothing. There are luxury items, chocolates, cosmetics, toys for children. And the prices are low enough that ordinary workers can afford them." In small-town America, German prisoners saw something their propaganda had told them was impossible, a functioning consumer economy operating simultaneously with massive war production. They saw women driving cars to factory jobs. They saw teenagers with pocket money buying ice cream and going to movie theaters. They saw waste, food thrown away, products discarded because newer models were available. The abundance was obscene to men from a country where everything was rationed, recycled, or unavailable. Gefreiter Hans Muller watched an American family throw away half a loaf of bread because it was getting stale. He retrieved it from the trash and ate it. It was fresher than the bread he'd eaten as a soldier. "We are fighting a nation that throws away food," he wrote. "What chance did we ever have?" Nothing symbolized American abundance more than automobiles. German prisoners were stunned by how many cars they saw, and by who owned them. In Germany, automobiles were luxury items owned primarily by the wealthy and the military. The Volkswagen, the people's car, had been promised by Hitler but never delivered to ordinary citizens in meaningful numbers. In America, everybody had a car. Factory workers drove cars. Farmers drove cars. Even some teenagers had cars. The prisoners saw parking lots at factories filled with hundreds of vehicles, each one representing a worker who could afford personal transportation. Hauptmann Werner Vogel watched workers leave a Detroit factory. They come out and get into their own cars. Not a bus. Not a train. Their own personal automobiles. There must be 300 cars in that parking lot. For one shift. At one factory. The quality of the cars shocked them too. These weren't primitive vehicles, they were comfortable, powerful, often just a few years old. And Americans complained about them. They wanted newer models, better features, more luxury. Prisoners heard Americans grumble about gas rationing, reduced to just 3 gallons per week for non-essential driving. 3 gallons was more than most German civilians had seen in years. And Americans were calling it a hardship. The automobile culture revealed something deeper. American industrial capacity was so vast that it could mass-produce complex machinery for individual civilian use while simultaneously building the largest military force in history. The scale was incomprehensible. Nazi ideology had taught German soldiers that racial mixing weakened nations and that non-white peoples were inherently inferior. Then German POWs met African American guards and workers, and the ideology cracked. Many camps in the South were guarded by black American units. The German prisoners expected to find the racial inferiors described in Nazi propaganda. Instead, they found professional soldiers who were well-trained, well-equipped, and often better educated than the prisoners themselves. Gefreiter Otto Brenner was guarded by the 183rd Engineer Battalion, an all-black unit. The Negro soldiers are not what we were told. They are disciplined. They operate complex machinery. Many speak multiple languages, they translate for us. Some have university degrees. Our propaganda said they were barely human. This is clearly false. The contradiction was profound. If Nazi racial theory was wrong about black Americans, what else was it wrong about? Some prisoners clung to their ideology, insisting that black soldiers were exceptions or that they were somehow different from other non-whites. But others began questioning everything they'd been taught. Lieutenant Stefan Klein wrote, "I was taught that racial purity made Germany strong. But America, this mongrel nation we were told to despise, has defeated us with an integrated force that includes soldiers of every race. Perhaps we were wrong about more than just the war." The cognitive dissonance was painful. But for many prisoners, it was also liberating. They were beginning to think for themselves. German prisoners working in lumber camps and agricultural areas regularly saw something that contradicted everything Nazi ideology taught about women's roles, American women working in heavy industry. In Germany, women were expected to fulfill the role of homemaker and mother. The Nazi slogan was, Kinder, Kusch, Kirche, children, kitchen, church. While German women did enter the workforce as the war progressed, it was seen as a temporary necessity, not a permanent change. In America, women weren't just working, they were building bombers, welding ships, operating cranes, and managing complex industrial processes. And they were doing it competently. Feldwebel Kurt Weber saw women working at a bomber plant near his camp in Texas. They are assembling B-24 bombers. Not doing light work, they are riveting, welding, reading complex blueprints. Our propaganda said women were too weak and emotional for such work. These women are building the aircraft that are destroying German cities. The iconic image of Rosie the Riveter wasn't just propaganda, it was reality. American women were a significant part of the industrial workforce, and their contribution was making a measurable difference in America's production advantage. Prisoners also noticed that these women were paid for their work, not much by male standards, but enough to afford independence. They drove cars to the factories. They wore pants. They made decisions. The contrast with German gender ideology was stark. Obergefreiter Hans Fischer wrote, "America has mobilized its entire population, men, women, all races. We mobilized only part of ours. This may explain why they are winning." Beginning in 1944, the U.S. military implemented a systematic re-education program for German POWs. The goal was to expose them to democratic ideas and prepare them to return to Germany as opponents of Nazism. The program was controversial, sophisticated, and surprisingly effective. Prisoners were shown films about American history, democracy, and the realities of Nazi crimes. They attended lectures. They were given access to banned books and newspapers. The program carefully avoided heavy-handed propaganda. The organizers understood that Germans were already suspicious of propaganda. Instead, the program used facts, evidence, and Socratic questioning to encourage prisoners to think critically. Lieutenant Dieter Hartmann participated in the program at Camp Concordia, Kansas. They showed us footage from liberated concentration camps. We did not believe it at first. We said it was fake, propaganda. But then they showed us German documents, testimony from German guards, evidence that could not be fabricated. Some prisoners still refused to believe. I could not refuse. The evidence was overwhelming. The re-education wasn't just about Nazi crimes, it was about democratic principles. Prisoners learned about free speech, free press, competitive elections, separation of powers. Concepts that had been mocked in Nazi Germany as signs of weakness. Oberst Friedrich von Hosslin, a career officer, reflected, "I fought for Germany, not for Hitler. I am beginning to understand the difference. Germany was great before the Nazis and can be great again after them. But only if we reject everything they taught us." By war's end, approximately 20% of German POWs in America had been through intensive re-education and were converted to democratic principles. German prisoners were allowed to write letters home, censored, but allowed. These letters became a crucial channel for spreading information about American reality to German civilians who were still receiving only Nazi propaganda. The censors removed military information and obvious anti-Nazi statements, but they allowed prisoners to describe their living conditions, the food, and general observations about America. Unteroffizier Heinrich Bohm wrote to his wife in Hamburg, "I am healthy and well-fed. The camp is comfortable. We have heat, clean water, and sufficient food. I know you are struggling at home. I wish I could share what I have here." Between the lines, German families read the truth: their soldiers were better off as prisoners in America than civilians were at home. This revelation was devastating to Nazi propaganda. The regime had spent years claiming that captured soldiers faced torture and starvation. Instead, families were receiving letters describing abundance. Some prisoners were more direct. Gefreiter Martin Sievers wrote, "Everything we were told about America was false. They are not weak. They are not starving. They are the strongest nation I have ever seen. Mother, I fear that our leaders have lied to us about everything. I fear for Germany's future if we continue this war." German censors intercepted some letters, but enough got through to have an impact. By late 1944, German civilians were increasingly skeptical of propaganda, partly because of what their captured relatives were reporting from America. The letters carried an authority that no propaganda could match. These were German soldiers, patriots, describing what they had seen with their own eyes. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, German POWs in America faced repatriation. Under international law, they had to be returned home. Surprisingly, many didn't want to go. They had spent months or years in America seeing abundance, freedom, and opportunity. They were returning to a Germany that was destroyed, starving, and divided between occupying powers. Some prisoners had worked in American communities and formed relationships with local families. They had seen a different way of life and wanted to be part of it. Gefreiter Otto Brenner had worked on a farm in Nebraska for 2 years. The farmer, Mr. Johnson, treats me like a son. He has offered to sponsor my immigration after I return to Germany and serve my required time there. I want to come back. There is nothing left for me in Germany, my city is rubble, my family is dead or scattered. Here, there is a future. Many German POWs did eventually return to America as immigrants in the late 1940s and 1950s. They became farmers, businessmen, engineers, professors. They married American women and raised American children. They brought skills and a powerful work ethic. For these men, capture had been a blessing. It had saved their lives, exposed them to new ideas, and given them a second chance. Hauptmann Werner Kritzinger, who had arrived in Norfolk expecting to find a weak and collapsing nation, settled in Virginia after the war. He became a successful engineer and lived to age 92. In his memoirs, he wrote, "I thought I knew what America was. I was completely wrong. Coming here as a prisoner was the best thing that ever happened to me." When German prisoners finally had access to accurate information, the statistics of American industrial production were almost unbelievable. During World War II, the United States produced 297,000 aircraft, more than Germany and Japan combined. 193,000 artillery pieces. 86,000 tanks. 2 million trucks. 8,800 naval vessels. 5,600 merchant ships. 2.5 million tons of bombs. This was accomplished while maintaining civilian production of consumer goods, feeding allies through Lend-Lease, and keeping the American standard of living higher than any other nation at war. Germany's total war economy, with every resource devoted to military production, couldn't match America's output even though America was simultaneously supplying Britain, the Soviet Union, and maintaining substantial civilian production. Oberst Friedrich von Hoslin studied these figures at Camp Como. "I am a trained military officer. I understand logistics. These numbers mean that Germany never had a realistic chance of winning. We could not have won even if America had been our only opponent. But we also fought the Soviets, the British, and many others. It was mathematical suicide. The productivity wasn't just about size, it was about efficiency. American factories used assembly line production, standardization, and interchangeable parts. They pioneered mass production techniques that made manufacturing faster and cheaper. German production, while technologically sophisticated, was often artisanal, each tank or aircraft slightly different, requiring custom parts and skilled labor. The American system could train semi-skilled workers to produce complex machinery in weeks. The contrast was stark. Germany fought a 19th-century war with 20th-century weapons. America fought a fully industrialized, modern war. The experience of being a POW in America fundamentally changed many German soldiers' worldview. They had entered captivity as committed Nazis or at least as German patriots who believed in their nation's superiority. They left questioning everything. The cognitive dissonance was painful. Nazi ideology had taught them that democracy made nations weak, that racial purity made nations strong, that Jews secretly controlled everything, that America was decadent and collapsing. Every single premise was proven false. Some prisoners couldn't accept it. They clung to their ideology, insisted that what they were seeing was an elaborate deception, claimed that Germany would still win through secret weapons or that the reports of defeat were lies. These men returned to Germany as unreconstructed Nazis. But many others underwent genuine transformation. Lieutenant Stefan Klein described his crisis: "I believed in the Führer. I believed we were the master race. I believed we would triumph. Everything I believed was wrong. This is not easy to accept. It means my entire adult life was wasted serving a lie. But I cannot deny what I have seen." The transformation wasn't just intellectual, it was emotional and spiritual. These men had to reconstruct their identity, their values, and their understanding of the world. Some succeeded. They became Democrats, opponents of militarism, advocates for peace. They returned to Germany and helped build the Democratic Federal Republic. Others never fully recovered from the psychological shock. They had lost not just a war but their entire framework for understanding reality. The approximately 375,000 German prisoners held in America during World War II returned home with stories that helped reshape German society. They had seen democracy in action. They had experienced freedom of speech and press. They had witnessed a multiracial, multi-ethnic society that functioned more effectively than the racially pure society they'd been promised. Their testimony mattered. When Soviet propaganda claimed that capitalism enslaved workers, returned POWs could say, "I was a prisoner in America, and I was treated better than German workers under the Nazis." When extremists tried to revive Nazi ideology, veterans could say, "I saw America's strength." That path leads only to destruction. The POW experience contributed to Germany's post-war transformation. The Federal Republic that emerged in 1949 was democratic, cooperative with former enemies, and committed to integration with Europe and the West. Former POWs were part of building that new Germany. Gefreiter Martin Sievers became a schoolteacher and taught his students, "I learned in America that democracy is not weakness, it is strength. That diversity is not corruption, it is vitality. That freedom is not chaos, it is the foundation of prosperity." Germany must never forget these lessons. Today, the German POW experience in America is studied as an example of successful post-conflict reconciliation. The prisoners were treated humanely, exposed to alternative ideas, and given a chance to reconsider their beliefs. Many took that chance. The industrial might that shocked them into recognizing reality was real. But equally important was the humane treatment that made them willing to listen. In the end, America defeated Germany not just with tanks and bombers, but with ideas, and with the industrial power to make those ideas reality.